Hi, this is Ms. Sherman again, and this is Lesson 21, Competition and Selection. These are the questions and answers. We started off with reading earlier. You should have learned these three definitions. Competition, which occurs when organisms try to use the same resources, and we talked a little bit about different species competing and even the same species competing. Extinction, when there's a disappearance of all the members of a species on Earth, and endangered species, when one of them becomes endangered or becomes at risk for becoming extinct. So the vocabulary I gave you before you started was keen or keener, strong or stronger sense in our case when we were talking. Moss, a type of plant, likes moisture. We talked about sand dunes, which are hills of sand, and piping plover. And spindly meant tall and thin, and we can see that radish stems can be spindly and radishes grow below ground. So now that we're up to date with that, we can start with our question and answers. Feel free to go to the page and pause at any point that you'd like. So for the first couple, we're just going to go over them to save us time. If you have questions, ask in person or write me an email. Under what conditions do organisms compete with each other? So remember, they have to be the same place and need the same resources. Organisms compete with each other if they live in the same place at the same time and are trying to use the same resources. So, ladies and gentlemen, remember, once again, I shouldn't see my answers on your paper. You should be putting them in your own words, and they should have already been there. You're just checking to see if it's right. Number 2, what might a fox with a keener sense of smell be more likely to survive than a fox without a keen sense of smell? So we can say keen, strong, right? A fox with a better sense of smell might be able to find more mice and rabbits to eat. So this is just a quick video to show how a fox with a keen sense of sound, how he can, with a strong sense of hearing, will be able to find prey that a fox without a good sense of hearing can hear or do.
It listens for the tiny sounds of its prey moving about below, but must take great care not to scare them away.
There's mice underneath that snow, and you can hear them. Can't see them. Was able to pinpoint where they were and find his prey. So that was just an example of how stronger senses or keener senses can help a fox survive. All right, so number 3, mosses require a moist environment to reproduce. Describe an environmental change that could make certain mosses extinct. So we know a lot of environmental change is happening with climate change. If the environment had a climate change which resulted in a dry, because they need moist, a dry environment, the mosses could become extinct. We're now on question 4. Hundreds of years ago, rats escaped from European ships visiting Hawaii. The rats had no predators and began eating eggs of geese. What happened to the rat population? Why? What happened to the goose population? Why? So, it sounds like the rats are an invasive species. The rats have no predators. I would have underlined that. They eat the egg of geese. So there's 2 questions that they asked us to explain. What happens to the rat population? Well, if they're not getting eaten and they have food to eat, they're going to increase. And I just explained why. What happens to the goose population? Well, they're going to decrease because now there's things eating their eggs. There's these rats. So here's what I wrote. I explained why for both questions. The rat population increased. The rat population had plenty of food and no predators. They did not have to compete with other organisms. The goose population went down. They were unable to reproduce. They became endangered, hypothetically. Number 5. You go to the beach with your friends, but the beach is closed. A sign says sand dunes are the nesting site of the piping plover, and it's the bird's nesting season. Why might officials close the beach? Well, if it's during their nesting season and the beach is closed, the nesting sites are at the beach, they're probably closing to protect the nesting sites. Well, they don't do this for every animal, so it must be a special reason. Maybe the piping plover is endangered. The plovers might be an endangered species. Officials might have closed the beach to protect the plovers' nests so that the birds could successfully reproduce. All right, number 6. What would happen to the competition for predators' food if there was a sudden increase in food for their prey? Explain your answer. So this is general. So if there's an increase in, let's say, rabbits' food, what happens to the fox? So if there's an increase in rabbits' food, the rabbit's going to increase, and then eventually the foxes would increase too. With a sudden increase in food for prey, the population of prey would increase, thus increasing the population of predators. Okay, this brings us to the next page, and this is really good exercise. Remember, diagrams are your best friend, so aren't charts. So always read the directions. So directions 7 through 11. For each question, write your answer in the spaces provided. Base your answers on questions 7 through 11 on the diagram below. Do not make it up out of your head. That means that they're going to give you answers to the questions. You might need to combine it with some prior knowledge, but basically you'll be able to answer these questions if you can read this graph. Now don't be afraid. It's very helpful. Here we can always start with the title. Number of birds and mammals that became extinct from 1600 to 1949. So on this axis, the y-axis, we have number of species that became extinct. And here we have years, and it looks like it's going up every 50 years. Now there's a double bar graph. The dark bar is birds, and the light bar is mammals. And then here's just some examples. Now we don't need to go reading all of them. Probably could get really distracted and engaged just going through the names of them. I know I did. But be mindful of time. You don't want to run out of time. So let's go answer some of these questions. All right, so this starts us off with number 7. During what time period did the fewest number of species become extinct? So over here we have a time period. We have 1600 to 1649, and each one goes up. So this is through, these are what they're talking about by time period, each little section, interval. So the fewest number of species become extinct. Well, I noticed that here the number of mammals is really low, but also here it is well. But birds is really shot up in this time period. But this one looks like it's probably the least. So the fewest. So I'm talking about right here. So this one looks like the fewest overall. And I would have written it like so. The fewest number of species that became extinct between 1700 and 1749 was between. There we go. All right. During what time period did the fewest number of mammals become extinct? During what time period did the greatest number of mammals become extinct? So that means, that we're only looking at the light tan. So the greatest and the fewest. So here we can definitely see this is the fewest, but then the greatest, I would definitely say right here. So the fewest and the greatest. Now, I would be marking up if this were me, so here we go. But I probably wouldn't be all over the place like this. A little bit neater. So, this is how I wrote it. The fewest number of mammals became extinct between 1800 and 1849. The greatest number of mammals became extinct between 1900 and 1949. Be careful that you did not do the birds, okay? That's probably one of the biggest points where we got messed up. So make sure that you answered on mammals. That brings us to number 9. In general, since 1600, what has been happening to the number of species that were unable to successfully compete with other organisms? So ones that weren't able to get resources to survive. So these are all that type of animal. They're talking about what happened to the animals that became extinct. Just a fancy way of saying what is this graph showing. The number of species that are unable to compete successfully with other organisms, the ones that became extinct, those are all these, went up and down. See, they went up and down until about 1850 when they increased rapidly. So basically how I answered this was I solved what they were talking about, unable to successfully compete with other organisms. They were talking about things that became extinct. And I looked at the graph overall. I saw, okay, there's no general trend here, but when we do get to about 1800, it just starts increasing and it goes really quickly. Next question. If you could extend the graph to 2049, what do you think would show about the number of newly extinct species? So if this graph were to continue, would it go down? Does that look right? Or would it go up? Well, let's look at the trend. We know that it was going up and down to about there, but there is a general trend where it was just increasing. So just based on this diagram, because that was our directions before, the number of newly extinct species would probably be even greater from 1950 to 2000, and from 2001 to 2049, it would be even greater. So I would say you could also just simply have said it would increase. Next question. Human activities have greatly accelerated the rate of extinction worldwide. Why should we be concerned? Well, we know that it's a cascading effect. One population decreasing will affect many other populations. So anytime the natural balance of a population is upset, there's an effect on all species, even humans. It could affect our food chain, it could affect our oxygen supply and our plants. And this brings us to our multiple choice. Number 12, for which resources are fox most likely to compete? They won't compete for plants because they don't eat them. Light, they really don't need to compete for that. And air, also not something. But prey, they definitely compete for their food. 13, these radishes plants were planted too close together. They were well fed and watered. Why are these plants so tall and spindly? So why aren't they a little bit shorter, and why are they so tall and thin? They're competing for food. Well, it said they were well fed, so that can't be right. Competing for air. I think there's enough air to go around. They're competing for water. They were well fed and well watered. They're competing for light. They are branching upwards so their leaves can get more light than the one next to them. 14. During the last 100 years, what has happened to the rate at which birds and mammals become extinct? We know that from our last questions. It has risen rapidly, has increased. 15. The result of habitat destruction and the use of poisons to kill other insects, the swallowtail butterfly is declining in number. This butterfly, which lives in the Florida Keys, was nearly wiped out by Hurricane Andrew. What is making it difficult for this species to survive? And we can say changes in environment. So that brings us to the last two. There's not enough time to really go over them. Which trait can help a tree compete for light? Same as a spindly tall, wide branching branching systems. All right, secret word is mammal.